Um, I just want to share with you how much fun it is to be a part of the GTAG family. Now, if you've been coming to this church and you don't have fun, you need to get involved in some other people's lives, because there are some great opportunities to have fun. As I came in this morning, several people kept asking me, "Did you get your deer? Did you get your deer?" Well, in a manner of speaking. I came in Friday morning and found this waiting for me on the pulpit. Now, some of you may not be able to see what it is, but it's that. And someone was very ingenious in putting that together for me. And if you can't read what it says, "Hey, Pastor Steve, can you see me now?" I loved it. And it'll find a nice place on my shelf. Now, I want to share with you another humorous story. This one goes a little more in line with the message, although this one is not quite out of place. One of the things I am finding, and as I hunt, it's all about timing. Being at the right place at the right time. And I'm going to share a little bit of a humorous story here. To address an emergency call, a doctor came to see a very wealthy patient at his home. You know this story had to take place a long time ago because doctors don't make house calls. The man was screaming with extreme stomach pain, and he was surrounded by many anxious relatives. The doctor kicked all of the relatives out of the room, and he closed the door with just him and a wealthy patient inside. After a while, he came out and asked, "Please give me a pair of scissors." One of the servants quickly ran and brought him a pair of stainless steel scissors. Again, the doctor went inside, closed the door, but soon came back. He said, "Please give me a hammer." Soon one was found and brought to him and placed in his hand. And a number of times he repeated this routine over and over of going inside and closing the door and coming out and asking for a different tool. The relatives that were gathered grew more and more concerned. Finally, the doctor came outside one more time and asked, "Please give me a screwdriver." The oldest son couldn't stand it any longer, and he lost his patience, and crying with a voice, he pleaded, "Doctor, please tell us what has happened to our dear dad. Will he live? Should we open his will?" The doctor said, "No, I don't know that yet. I'm still trying to open my stupid bag. I lost the key." How often do we misinterpret the actions and timing of God at work in our lives? Just like these family members misinterpreted the acts of the doctor. Today, I want you to see how you can learn to trust God, that He is at work in your life, that you can see it through His actions and through His timing. We're going to begin looking in the book of Luke, chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. Even as I say that, many of you will recognize that as one of the Christmas passages because it records the coming of Jesus. Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him. and was with child. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. Did you hear that last part? While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. Now, some people look at this statement in two different ways. While they were there, like it was a matter of chance. Joseph and Mary didn't plan to have a baby while they were there. It just worked out that way. It was just by chance or luck or coincidence. Now, if you think about your life in this way, you are removing the aspect of the miraculous and divine. That God as the one who ordains times and seasons. If you think things just happen to you by chance, you are missing out on recognizing the leading of God in your life. And if you think your life is just one chance after another with no plan, that leads you to living a life with no purpose. That's not the way I want to see life. The second way to look at it is this way, with the understanding that God had prepared, directed, and brought to pass His perfect plan. How do you look at this Christmas story? Was it just a series of different occurrences, circumstances, situations? Or do you look at it as God's divinely ordained timing and part of His plan? You see, if you believe He ordained all of those things, then you should believe He is ordaining the things in your life. This is the one I prefer to live by. After all, think about all of the events God had to coordinate so that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. This is what I want you to think about. So many times we just think, oh yeah, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Let's write a few songs and put up some lights. But I want you to think about all that went into that one event, all that God had to ordain before that transpired. The Romans needed to be in control of the world. God had to ordain that. God had to bring that to be. The edict given by Caesar to conduct a census, God had to ordain that. There's a scripture that says that the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. You need to keep that in mind, because your life is going to be touched by some people who make decisions and make choices that don't even care about who God is. They may be evil in their intent. Caesar was not a follower after God. Caesar believed himself to be God. Caesar could have cared less that this order was going to bring about or allow the ushering in of the birth of the Savior in Bethlehem. That's not why he made it. He wanted to know how many people were in his kingdom so he could tax them. That was his intent. And yet we see God is ordaining, we see His hand in each of these decisions and choices. Even years earlier, that Joseph was born to his parents in Bethlehem. So that when this edict would be given, he would have to return to his hometown to register. You see, God is at work. And many times we don't see it. We don't understand all of His ways. We don't understand all of His timing and what He's doing. But we do need to learn to trust that He is doing something. All of these things that God had to put in order and in place to bring about the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. He had to be born in the right city. He had to be born to the right person. All of these things that man could not have thought out. But in the divine wisdom of God, He's got it all taken care of. When we read that God has a plan for you, and it is not for your harm, but it is for your benefit, do you take solace in that? That God has prepared a plan for you, for your life, what you do, where you go, who you minister to, all the aspects of your life, even the things that you look at as being negative when they first happen. Have you learned to trust God to bring about something good and something beautiful out of what didn't start that way? You see, if you trust Him, and you trust in His divine sovereignty, and you believe His promise toward you, that is exactly what He is doing, even right now, this moment. Even right now, in your current situation, can you see God's handiwork in your life? Can you look back? Say, oh my goodness, God ordained certain things in my life that at the time I didn't even know about. I didn't understand what His plan was going to be. I've talked to a lot of people, and I am one of those people, that you go back 15 years ago, or 20, or 30, or 40, and what you're doing now, you would have never imagined that you'd be doing what you're doing now. You would have never imagined that God would use your life in the way He's using it now. And some of you are sitting here today, and you will think about this 10 years from now and say, I would have never believed 10 years ago that I'd be doing what I'm doing. This is the way our God works. He has prepared the plan, and He is working out His will in our lives. Why was it so important that Joseph be born in Bethlehem? Why was it so important that he be born in the line of David? Because it was fulfilling prophecy that was spoken hundreds of years earlier about what would happen. In the prophet Micah, Micah said that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Why is that important? Well, when the Magi from the east come to Herod, Herod, where's the one who's been the new king of the Jews? And I'm sure Herod was like, wait a minute, I'm the king of the Jews. There's another king coming? I didn't have a baby. Who is this king? And his intent was evil, make no mistake about it. Herod's intent was to kill the child so he could not become king. And he goes to his wise men, the scribes, and he says, do you guys know anything about this? Now I'm paraphrasing. That's not King James. Do you know anything about this, what these guys are saying? And they begin to search in the scrolls, and they say, yes, we do. In the scroll of Micah, Micah says that there would be the Messiah born in Bethlehem. And so the king sends the guys to Bethlehem, and then he says, yeah, and when you find him, come back and let me know, because I want to worship him too. I don't know if Joseph and Mary knew about that prophecy or not. There's a part of me that thinks that they did not know that prophecy in Micah. Even though Mary knew she was carrying the Son of God. Because I would tend to believe that if they had known that, and all of a sudden they have to go to Bethlehem, and she's very pregnant at the time, that there might have been hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? I mean, don't we try and do that? Don't we try and figure out what God's doing ahead of time? I do. I'm God, what are you doing? How are you working this out? And there have been times in my life where I've been, thank you, God, for showing it to me. I got it. Thank you for showing me what you want me to do. I got it. And then He changes it. But it's part of His plan. You see, when they were going Bethlehem, so Joseph could register. They didn't pack any baby clothes. They didn't pack any diapers. They didn't bring along a midwife. By the way, Nazareth is about 65 miles from Bethlehem. Now, in our day, 65 miles, we jump in our little cars or big cars, and we're like, oh, we'll be there in about an hour. So I thought, how long would it take you to walk 65 miles? We don't usually walk that far. Now, it was common in their day. I'm sure as Joseph and Mary started out on the journey, he had an idea how long it was going to take. We do not. So I did a little research. And this was the closest thing that I could come up with. Joseph and Mary's trip to Bethlehem would be similar to you walking from here to downtown Clarion. Roughly about 65 miles. Using the technology of Google Maps, if you've never used it, if you ever want to go on a hike, they have a little character out when you click directions. Are you going to travel by car, by bicycle, or walking, or whatever? And it'll tell you about how long it'll take. So I did that. And it says that that trip, walking from here to Clarion, would take about 20 hours. That does not include stops for food or rest or bathrooms. So figure it would probably take you a couple of days to walk to Clarion. If you're pregnant, figure it's going to take you longer because there will certainly be more bathroom stops. And I do not believe that Joseph and Mary started that journey with any knowledge at all of what was going to happen once they got to Bethlehem, other than Joseph needed to register. That was the only thing they were thinking they were doing. They also had no control over the decision of Caesar Augustus to have a census of all the Roman Empire. Now, about 9 months before this, God enacted another part of his plan where he sent an angel to speak to Mary. And Mary agrees to be the mother of God. Joseph had to understand that what happened to Mary was not the result of sinful immorality, but was indeed the plan of God. He needed an angel to come to him. This is God's plan. Don't be afraid, Joseph. God's got it all in control. And time after time, throughout the Scripture, we read how certain things were done to fulfill what was spoken of through the prophet. How many times in the story of Jesus do we not read those words? This was done so that what was spoken of by the prophet would be fulfilled. Jesus did this so that what was spoken of by the prophet would come to pass. We read this over and over and over again. In fact, somebody counted them up and says that Jesus fulfilled over 300 Old Testament prophecies. Over 300 prophecies were fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. This could not have happened by random chance. It could only have happened by the divine coordination of God. That God's hand was indeed involved in what was taking place on this earth. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4 says this. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law. Romans chapter 5, verse 6 says this, For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. There is no chance in that. There is no hint of fate. There is no hint of happenstance. Again, we must see God sets and ordains the time. Do you know what that should tell you? God is watching you. He is aware of what's going on in your life. He is aware of what's going on in this world. It wasn't just any time in human history that Jesus showed up. It was the right time. It wasn't by chance, but it was at the point of God's choosing. This is when it needs to happen. This is how it has to happen. This is where it has to happen. All of these things needed to be done specifically by God's design, and they were done. Now, some of you are probably like me and wanting to know, hey, God, I believe you have a plan. I believe it. Just tell me what it is, and I'll take it from here. Just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it. By the way, I also want to know how it's going to work out before I do it. I also want to see what the end result will be. I also want to make sure that everything will be taken care of. If you could just show me all of that too, then we can move forward with this. I have found God rarely ever does that. After all, how would He build faith in us if He showed us everything ahead of time? How would we learn to trust Him if we weren't brought to circumstances that were out of our control where we needed to see His hand at work? In Acts chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, we find the disciples basically asking the question I just mentioned. Like, tell us the future, God. Acts chapter 1, verse 6 says this, so when they had come together, they were asking Him, speaking of the disciples, asking Jesus, Lord, is it at this time you are restoring the kingdom of Israel? Their question was this. Now, they believed Him to be the Messiah, and He was. They believed Him to be the Son of God. He was. But they believed that the Messiah was going to do something different than what He did. The Jewish people hated the Romans. They hated being invaded by a foreign power and being told what to do by a foreign government. They hated having to pay their tax to Caesar. And they believed that one day their Messiah would come and deliver them governmentally, militarily. That the Messiah would overthrow and they would cast off their bonds of this invading force. And so they asked Jesus, is it time, Lord? Is it time? Is this when we're going to kick their butts out of Jerusalem? Just say the word, we're ready. And Jesus makes this statement. It is not for you to know the times or epochs which the Father has fixed by His own authority. Whoa. Now, you can look at that and just look at it in the negative way and say, oh, God doesn't want me to know what He's doing. And listen, let me tell you, there will be times you do not know what He's doing. But you can still trust Him in it. You can still walk in obedience to Him in it. You can also look at it and say this, what Jesus was telling them is that God has fixed times and seasons by His authority. And it will happen. God the Father has established times and seasons by his own authority. I think most of us would agree that God can do whatever he wants. He is God. I mean, who are we? No, God, you can't do that. I won't stand for it. You may not. You may get knocked down. But really, we know he is God. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And we are not always privy to what he has decided to do. I know in my life, and I'm sure it's happened in your life, if you've been walking with the Lord, you have had this experience where things have happened that you were not planning and that you did not want, but yet they occurred. And yet in that, God is still working out his plan for you. His plan for you has not changed. He is still at work. Thankfully, there are times where we can also look back and we can see God's sovereign hand over us in seasons of our lives, maybe even seasons where we weren't following him. Maybe even seasons where we were so discouraged or we were seeking fulfillment in other avenues, but we look back and we see, oh, God had his hand on me. I didn't even realize it at the time. Didn't even know it. But he was faithful. If that is the case, then the fact that you know him today, that should bring comfort to you. Even if you're going through a difficulty, that you know God has not left you. He is going to work something out in your life that is going to result for your good and for his glory. Just keep your eyes on him. Now you can turn. You can get your eyes off of him. You can make sinful choices and you can get sidetracked. I want to encourage you, do not let that happen. When you are living life and things are uncertain and you're not sure what tomorrow holds and you don't even know how you're going to get through today, by faith, walk in obedience to him. Don't give up. Don't allow the whispers of the enemy that says, you see, God doesn't really care about you, does he? Don't allow it. When you hear such things, you know that's not coming from God. When you hear such things, you can fight that by saying, you know what, that may be how I feel, but this is what I know. That while I was his enemy, Jesus died for me. That God loves the world so much that he gave his only son for me. So I may not feel it right now. I may not even understand what the plan being unfolded is all about. But I believe in the goodness and kindness and love of God for me. And I believe he has a plan for my life. And I believe as long as I keep my eyes on him, he is going to continue to lead me and direct me in the path that he has set for me. Here the disciples had a very keen interest in knowing if Jesus was restoring Israel as an earthly kingdom. Come on, Jesus, raise us up. Make us strong again. They wanted to know because this had an important impact on their lives. Just think about it. They had been following Jesus for several years now. Jesus made some promises to them. No one has given up anything on this earth that they will not be rewarded greatly. Okay, Messiah. I'm looking forward to that reward. Is this the time you're kicking the Romans out? Because there's a few sections of the country I'd like to be in charge of. They were thinking of it selfishly, how it would impact them. And that's not wrong, that's just human. How many times don't we do that? How will it impact me? Lord, you want me to do what? Wait a minute. That doesn't sound like it's going to be very good for me. That doesn't sound very convenient, Lord. That doesn't sound like I'm going to be blessed as a result of that. I'm just not feeling it. I'm sure if God had gone to Joseph in the Old Testament and said, Joseph, here's the plan. Yeah, one day you're going to be a great leader. But before that, you're going to get thrown in a pit. And then you're going to get sold as a servant. And then you're going to be serve as a servant in a rich man's house. And then you're going to be falsely accused. And then you're going to be thrown in prison. How does that plan sound to you, Joseph? Lord, I'll choose door number 2. You see, many times, God does not give us the option of the plan. Our only option is obedience to Him. In fact, I was just reading this morning, one of the devotional thoughts was talking about Joseph, and just made this thought. When Joseph was in prison, and throughout Joseph's life, this statement followed him each step of the way. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And the neat thing about that statement is it's not just that God was there. What that means is Joseph looked at all of his choices with an eye toward what was pleasing to God. And the opportunities he had where he could have chosen disobedience, when he could have chosen ease of life, when he could have thought God had abandoned him, that God's initial plan was thwarted, and that it really didn't matter, he chose always obedience. And the result of those obedient choices was that the Lord was with him and blessed him in all he did. Oh, may we be in such a place. When we are in those places where we do not understand God's timing, we do not understand His plan, it may look like people have it in for us. Why are we going through this? That within us there is still that sense of hope that God is who He says He is. He will do what He says He will do. He has not left me. He will bring something good out of this. I can trust Him with my life. I will choose to walk in obedience and see what the Lord will do. May we be such a people. One of the hardest things for the Jewish person in Jesus' day was to understand how God could let the evil Roman Empire rule over them. About the only way we could identify with that is if we would think of another nation that is strong enough to overthrow the United States. We have never really lived under that in the history of our country. Well, at the very beginning we did, but a few guys with guns took care of them. We do not know what it is like to live under the authority of another government after we have experienced freedom for our whole lives. I hope we never do. But if that was to happen, can you picture if there was a nation that came in and took over and we were living our lives under their rules, under their authority? We would be like, oh God, why are you letting this happen? Oh God, we have served you. Why are you letting this happen? That's exactly what the Jewish people were doing. And that's exactly why the disciples wanted to know, Jesus, is it time to set things in order, to get this taken care of? It made no sense that God would allow his people to be ruled by a godless nation. But he did. And let's look at some of the ways, some of the reasons how God used that Gentile nation to accomplish his will. We can look at it going back. They couldn't understand it when they were living in it. First of all, crucifixion. That was the torturous tool of the Roman Empire. Without it, Jesus would not have fulfilled the prophecy of being hung on a tree. It was at this point the right time. Jesus had to be on the scene to give his life a ransom for many. The second positive that occurred from the Roman Empire was the system of roads and travel that was built. One of the things, if you remember back to your world history days, one of the great things that came about as a result of the Roman Empire was the system of roads that they built. Now, I know in Christianity we have this little salvation tool we call the Roman road, and it's kind of a play on words. But really the reality is that Rome built this transportation system that allowed for the quick travel. Really, it was designed for the quick travel of their troops. That their troops could get from one place to another and squelch an uprising here and conquer another land here. And the further out they went, the more roads they built. And while they built them for the travel of their troops, it also provided for the quick expansion of the gospel. That when people came to know Christ, when we read about in the book of Acts when persecution came and the church was scattered, but wherever they went, they preached the gospel. The Roman roads allowed the quick transport of that. At the beginning, I mentioned that you often have difficulty in understanding God's actions and timings. And it is usually because we are so self-focused that we don't see God's bigger plan. I don't think for a moment that when Joseph and Mary heard the order that had been given to travel to Bethlehem to sign up for the census, I don't think for a moment Joseph was like, yes, let's go on a trip. As a Jewish businessman, a carpenter who had to pay taxes to the Roman government, and he knew by registering that was only going to get worse. Why do I have to go there? What are these lousy Romans up to now? What brilliant mind came up with this idea? This trip is going to cost me time and money. Not only do I have to plan for my travel, but also my fiancée. She's pregnant. This could not be a more worse time to travel than now. Do you ever look at circumstances that way? I do. Some of those things that I just said, I said before I wrote them down. Some of those things I said, you've said. Do you ever look at the circumstances of your life and just wonder, God, what are you up to? God, what are you doing? Now, there may be times where He tells you some of what He is doing. Thankfully, we've had those experiences too. where he says, this is what I want you to do. Or he puts on you something, and his Spirit inside of you leads you to do something. You may not know the outcome, but you know it's him leading. And so you do it. But there will be other times in life where God will remain silent as to the reason things are going on the way they are. And you can go through the events of your day and not even recognize just how actively he is working out his plan for you. Again, if we can take this, even this Christmas story, and bring it into our lives, and you begin looking at how God has ordained things in your life. Look back how he has placed you where you're at. Maybe a job that was given to you that you never knew was going to grow into what it is. Or maybe a job that was taken away that caused you to move in a different direction so that you could be where you're at now. Maybe a relationship in your life that you just look back and you recognize God's hand has been in it. And yes, there are times where we look back and relationships have not ended the way we want. But we still trust God's plan and that he is in it. Begin to look at your life and say, God, I believe you are ordaining my footsteps. I believe you are ordaining my footsteps. Lord, I may not always understand. I may not know your plan ahead of time, but I believe you will ordain my footsteps. My eyes are on you. I choose obedience over pleasure. I choose obedience over convenience. I choose obedience over what I want. So that, Lord, I may walk in your ways and I may see your plan unfolded, that I may accomplish your will and bring glory to you. He is orchestrating life circumstances for your life. He is orchestrating them for just the right time. Be confident in God's faithfulness. Seek him for answers. But don't let your obedience hinge on whether he tells you what he's up to. God, who is able to see down through the centuries, knows the right time. He knew the right time he needed to send his son. He knows the right time where he will need to unfold his plan in your life. He knows. Trust him to lead and direct the details of your life. Trust him. Trust him. His hands are trustworthy. He will not let your life falter. He will not let your life be destroyed. That doesn't mean there won't be trials. That doesn't mean there won't be hardships. But he is going to ordain your life for his glory. Keep looking for him. If you're going through a difficult season right now in your life, look to him. Look to him. Lord, get my eyes on you again. Help me to do what you've called me to do. Get me back to where I need to be. And if you are faithfully serving him right now, keep trusting him. Keep looking for the doors he will open. Even the doors he closes, trust that he's doing it as part of his leading and ordaining of your footsteps. He's got your good in mind. The result will be that when you enter eternity, you will never look back on your life and be discouraged. When you enter eternity and see him face to face, you will not look back on your life and say, boy, this wasn't worth it. No. No. The great songwriter who penned these words, it will be worth it all when we see Jesus. Life's trials will seem so small when we see Christ. That is what we're heading toward, and that is why we keep our eyes on him through this life. Because if our eyes are on him now, they will certainly be on him for eternity. Let's bow our heads.